Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I am Nicole van der Hoeven, and this is probably the last office hours of the year. But we're ending with a bang because today we've got Robin, our CEO.
Hello.
He's
Yeah,
been
I'm the
on
CEO, and you're
a
already
few times
presenting me.
already.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And he's helping me interview an awesome guest. Daniel, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Daniel. Uh, I work at Eurofunk, and Eurofunk implements mission-critical software for blue light organizations and emergency centers. And my role at Eurofunk is implementing load tests and performance tests of our application. And for that, I use K6. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yes. I you mentioned that they're blue light services. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's the emergency services, so public safety sector that includes the police, ambulances, fire departments, and yeah, bigger companies that need their own safety.
So I invited you here because I saw that you'd given a talk, and it was at Tech Talk Days. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's correct.
Let me just put a link to the awesome video that we all saw. We shared this on the K6 internal Slack, and it's always such a rush to see somebody using something that we all help build, and it was not something that we knew was going to happen. We hadn't, or at least I hadn't talked to you beforehand. I don't know if you've had any interactions with us, but it's so cool to discover something like that in the wild. Why did you decide to do this talk?
Because it is really cool to share the knowledge and experience that I gain using a product. And it was also a nice opportunity to do a bit of advertisement for a company and also promote
So
a
what
really
do you,
cool K6 product.
awesome. So what do you actually do at Eurofunk, like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I'm analyzing our application performance. I'm coming up with new ways how to monitor the application and then to plan and implement load tests and performance tests that we can then execute to make sure that our application fulfills the needs of our customers.
So tell me about Eurofunk. I think, you based in Austria? Is that right?
We're based in Austria, yeah, that's right. So we're a company
Okay.
which provides command and control centers, emergency centers, full solution provider, which means we not only provide the software, but we also provide the hardware, the networks, the computers, and so on, the servers, so everything. We have 500 employees. We have the headquarters in St. Johann, that's in the state of Salzburg. Then we have other offices in Hagenberg and in Salzburg City. And yeah, our customers, as I already mentioned, are mainly public safety, which means emergency centers, command and control centers, but also airports and industry.
Oh, airports as well. So is that
Yep.
like air traffic controls, that kind of thing?
It's mostly security and fire safety. So
Oh, I
CCTV
see.
and also smoke detectors and fire detectors.
Okay. So would you like to show something about what it looks like? What
Yeah, sure,
the Operation Center suite?
I can do that.
Here you go.
Right, I have prepared a few screenshots. This is the product EOX, so that's the Eurofunk Operations Center Suite. And what you can see here is the dashboard. So every dispatcher who's using our product can configure this dashboard to their needs, where you can see all the open incidents and missions, all the vehicles and radios that are in use and their state and their position. You can also have a map that's live updated with everything that's happening. in the area of responsibility, you have sessions of other users logged in and so on. And you can then directly from your browser using WebRTC do phone calls and also radio calls. You see who's talking on a radio or in a talk group. You get emergency calls and so on. And then when you're actively working on an incident, let me quickly check. Yeah, when you're working on an incident or in this overview mode, you have the incident list with all the details. So where is it? What is the incident? I'm sorry that the language is German, but this is basically, there is a fire or there has been a traffic accident and who's involved and some notes. And then again, more details about the vehicles in use. So you can have helicopters, police cars, fire trucks,
Wow.
and so on.
Wow, okay. So I think this is a really interesting use case because usually when we're doing load testing for clients, for customers, it's not quite as mission critical as this. I think the more common scenario is that maybe if the load testing isn't done well or the application isn't able to withstand the load, maybe there's like loss of profit or something. But it seems like for emergency services, the difference the difference between testing and not testing could mean lives are lost. Am I exaggerating it, or is that what it
No, I
is?
think you're putting it correctly. Our system has to provide consistent performance around the clock. So it's aggregating a lot of data from a lot of different data sources, and the data has to be displayed as fast as possible to the dispatcher so that they can then act on any emergencies.
How do you feel about that, Robin?
Yeah, I
That
was just
our
gonna.
application is, yeah, go on.
Yeah, that's very cool. I was gonna comment that probably the move fast and break things ethos doesn't work in this
No,
in this case, right?
not
So
really, no.
so it would be interesting to hear, how do you approach testing with this kind of solution? Do you start planning testing early on when you introduce new functionality and features, or is testing done, is it more waterfally, so you do it towards the end? Like, that would be interesting to understand.
It depends on the feature, so we do
Mhm.
both. We're still introducing K6, so we're learning every day.
Awesome.
But at the moment, we're coming up with scenarios that the dispatcher will or might use in our software, and then write tests for those use cases. And for extra critical pieces or components, we have separate tests that make sure that, for example, an emergency call is displayed in a snap, and
Right.
that accepting a call puts you with the caller on the phone right away.
A couple of funny comments from Floor here. She loves the "Trust Me, I'm a Programmer" shirt. And she said she expected a Santa hat filter for today. Well, I don't have a filter, but I did actually have this, but it's a little hard to show you that
Oh,
for it to still be in frame. And she's also acknowledging how scary this is for Robin, probably, knowing that emergency services are relying on us. Because I imagine that emergency services would have to be highly available, because you don't want to be in a situation where someone calls a hotline and then, there's nobody available to answer the call. But also, it's even worse to know that it's like a technical issue, that there are people there that could help, but they can't get the message that someone needs help. And then even things like high response times, even if it still gets there, but it took a long time. If you have to do a lot of actions, I mean, it sounds like with your application, you might have to talk to the fire brigade and or the police and or an ambulance. Those are not things that you want to be waiting on.
That's right. Yeah.
So what
I'm
were you
gonna-
doing before you used K6?
We had Selenium based tests, which remote control the
Oh,
front end.
yikes.
But those are very expensive to run because you need lots of hardware and lots of RAM
Yes.
to have all those Chrome instances running. And then I evaluated several tools. So we had a look at JMeter, for example, and I used Gatling for a while.
Mm,
But then I
yeah.
found out about K6 and I wrote some prototypes or proof of concepts for our use cases. And well, the winner was K6.
Yeah, this is the problem, right, in our industry, that this is a very common story that a company and like a testing team would have to go through several different tools, and each tool has a different language, a different framework. You're even in the case of Selenium, that's a browser-based testing tool, not a protocol-based testing tool. So even when you're comparing results or measurements, they're going to be completely different every time you change a tool. Was that an issue? Like, did you have to redo your baselines and that?
One of the main issues with the Selenium-based tests is that they easily break. You change the layout of your application, and then the test simply fails or measures the wrong things, which is equally bad.
Were you going to say something earlier, Robin?
Yeah, I was gonna comment. As far as I understood, right, the entire system is, or entire system, but at least the front end user facing parts is web based, right? So it's
That's
web
web-based, yeah.
platform. But, yeah.
I forgot to mention,
Yeah,
it runs in the browser.
It runs in the browser, right? Okay, so it's not like an Electron app or something. It's
No,
in
it
the
runs
browser.
in the browser.
Okay, that's very cool. It's very cool.
Do you miss the front end stuff that you used to be able to get from Selenium? Because you switched to all protocol based tools from the sounds of it, JMeter, Gatling, and now K6.
It handles different use cases, so we're not completely ditching it, but we're not using it for performance tests anymore. So only acceptance tests that make sure that the application
This is an awesome
works
comment.
clicking.
I'm sorry if I butcher your name, but Mirza Kuyundzits? I don't know, maybe if you know him, you might be able to pronounce it better.
It's a
Daniel
Kuyunjit.
Kuyundzits. Kuyunjik? Okay.
Kuyunjit.
As someone who worked on those Selenium tests, I must say there's a lot of hope involved. Look, I get it. That's what Selenium's infamous for, right? The flakiness, the inconsistency of tests. I've been there as well. And since you've mentioned it, have you heard of this awesome new tool called
The
XK6 browser?
I've read about it, but I haven't had the time to take a look at it.
The story behind that is, I'm sure, like Robin was already, this is like a common thing that many people have asked for throughout the years, right? But personally, from a personal level, this is something I brought up when Robin interviewed me to join K6. And because I was like, K6 is really awesome, but you have to have this because I think it would be a really good complement to the protocol-based testing tool. And Robin was very nice, and he said like, yeah, that's really good. We're looking into it, but never. I thought that was just a thing you said to be nice, right? 2 months later, when I joined K6, he had a prototype.
Yeah, I mean, but that was a long time in the making, right? So we've been thinking about browser based testing in K6 for years, right? So we already had something in the works when I talked to you.
Yeah, but the fact that it wasn't lip service, this is not a new idea. Other companies have done this too, but usually when you get told something like that at an interview, it doesn't really mean anything. But I was very impressed, Robin, and if I hadn't already said yes, I would have said yes then and there.
Oh, nice to hear.
So Robin is actually intimately involved in XK6 browser because he wrote a lot of the initial code. And I think the consensus is that it's still not like a Selenium replacement, right? Because Selenium has so many years of history on us, but that's the idea, at least.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it's a replacement yet for any of those, right? Selenium, Playwright, Puppeteer, because those tools have been around for a long time. They have more maturity and they cover a wider spectrum of use cases and APIs. But the aim is to, of course, make XK6 browser a core capability of K6, right? So right now it's an extension, but we intend to make it part of core eventually and be one of the well-supported use cases. And we want to make sure before we do that it's just very stable and reliable as a solution for running browser-based tests, because that's super important, right? You don't want the testing tool to be flaky. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Especially not when people's lives are at stake.
Even less than.
So what can you share about any concerns that you might have had for for this particular case that you don't have in more commercial cases?
What exactly do you mean? Can you?
Like, do you are we talking about a load of thousands or hundreds per second, or is there like a seasonality to the kind of
Okay,
load that you expect?
I get you. The thing is that our load is very heterogenic, so it's not only a browser load, but we have all those event sources that I talked earlier about. So you have the smoke detectors, you have the fire detectors, you have the radios that the policemen or the firefighters have with them at all times, and they're sending GPS coordinates, for example. You have to ingest all that information. So it's not just
Wow.
HTTP calls going to the front end. That's actually a smaller part of the whole picture, but you have all the information flowing into the system.
Yeah, what protocols are involved here? So HTTP for sure to some extent,
HTTP,
right?
yeah.
And then
There's
what are the other ones?
WebSockets
Okay.
to get the real-time information to the dispatches, and then we have message queues to send the info to our backend. And then depending on the hardware, so different smoke detectors, for example, there are different protocols involved, mostly binary.
Wow, that's so interesting. So, do you use K6 to simulate all of the different channels, or do you just pick the most common one and then do based on that? What was your approach?
At the moment, mostly HTTP based, but we have a component which we can use to translate HTTP calls to messages in our message queue. So we can basically simulate, I don't know, a smoke detector going off. But at the moment, I'm focusing on the HTTP part. So
How big is your
incident.
testing team? Is it just you?
No, we have several Scrum teams, each team with a tester. We have a separate testing team. Performance-wise, I'm still building up the team.
So you're allowed to take a holiday or a day off every now and then.
Yeah, of course.
So was it the people whom you have that are using K6, did they already have? I suppose that was one of the reasons why it was easier to switch to K6 because you already were using Selenium, so the JavaScript might have been easier to take. Were the languages an issue, like the language that a script is written in was
definitely part of the evaluation. So as I mentioned earlier, I had a look at Gatling, which is written in Scala. And while Scala is a nice language, it's just a lot more complicated to write correctly compared to JavaScript. And then there's JMeter, which is not really language based. It's just a GUI. So you click the fancy buttons and then you get lost in all the options that you can set. So it was definitely part of the decision to pick K6.
Okay, that's good to know. And was it difficult to get approval to use K6? Did you do a POC or did you actually I'm not sure. Do you even use K6 Cloud or do you just use the open source version?
We used the open source version of K6. And yeah, I did POCs, so in the different tools. Gatling, K6, JMeter. Then there's also, I think, Grinder, is it called?
Oh yeah.
And the AB, the Apache benchmark tool. But not all of them could offer support for all the protocols that we need, or were just difficult to use.
Was ease of use the number one thing, would you say, that made you choose K6?
No, the number one thing was actually support for the protocols that we have. So HTTP in combination with WebSockets and interleaving them.
Okay, yeah. All right. Did you have to do any convincing of to get people to switch to K6?
A little bit.
I'm curious, what were the main objections to K6?
Well, I think one was yet another tool. We already have tools.
Yeah.
We don't want to learn new tools. And yeah, also JavaScript, we use TypeScript a lot. And the objection was, can't we use TypeScript? Well, of course you can. But then there's additional steps involved in cross-compiling back to JavaScript before you can run the tests, which is a bit annoying. And the tests are usually smallish enough that you can write them in JavaScript without breaking the test all the time.
So I've read that in terms of workload models, my impression is that, news outlets always say that the incidences of accidents or even things like heart attacks increase during the holidays. Would you know? Is there like a seasonality to demand for emergency services?
I don't know about the heart attacks, but there's a seasonality in the usage patterns of our system. So there's usually less load on weekends, and there's a higher load during lunchtime and in the mornings. But yeah.
Okay, because I imagine that would be something that you would consider, because usually I would think that it would be easier to forecast how many users or how many buyers you might get for an e-commerce site than trying to predict when emergencies will happen, because emergencies are usually unexpected. Was it difficult to get the data for that?
We're comparing with our production systems, and then we're adapting the tests to match what we see in the production system, or, well, put a high load on the system to see when it breaks or if it breaks. That's basically the way our tests are designed. So I'm not modeling users that are performing actions. I'm most of the time using the rate, the request rate. So I specify I want to have 1,000 requests per second on this endpoint. And
is that also how you do like capacity planning in terms of how large the installation should be when because you said you do like the full solution, right? Typically for a control center, is that like part of the capacity planning? Like how many messages, requests, this center is supposed to be
planning,
able to? Okay. And do you do validations of like an installation with sort of simulated traffic?
In-house and not in production.
In-house,
I think that was one question that Nicole sent in before.
Okay.
If we test pre-prod or in prod, we test pre-prod.
Yeah.
Because you can't really test in a live environment.
Right. Okay, that's true. That's true. I guess if there was like a separate cord for like simulated traffic, and then you switch over to the production traffic. But that makes sense. It's connected to real stuff. Yeah.
So what kind of tests do you do? Is it mainly soak tests or peak load or spike or all of
Yeah.
them, I guess.
Yeah, most of the times our main tests are soak tests, which simply test the system as a whole multiple times a day to make sure that there are no regressions in critical functionality. While developing, we often do ad hoc stress tests. So if we implement a new endpoint, we just want to see how much load does it take until the application breaks.
Do you do any chaos engineering, chaos testing?
No, not really.
Okay.
Did you know? Sorry, I thought I missed my cue, Robin. Did you know that there
There's
was?
x6 chaos.
Yes.
It's definitely on the roadmap, but at the moment we're trying to focus on having stable tests that give us answers, and then we can introduce more chaos into the system.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
complexity into the
actually,
test.
I don't think that would be great. I don't think, does your application run in a Kubernetes cluster though?
It does, yeah.
Oh, it does. Okay, I thought it didn't. I was gonna say because that only works for Kubernetes, but hey, it might actually work then. But right now, the XK6 Chaos extension only terminates Kubernetes pods. Like so you can determine how that's chosen by namespace or randomly or whatever. But I would love to see it extended with more things like CPU utilization, like trying to artificially induce CPU starvation
Yeah.
and that sort of
And maybe
thing.
limit the bandwidth of the network, stuff like that. Introducing
Yeah.
delays.
Yes. So it's already theoretically possible. There's another extension that lets you execute things in Kubernetes clusters, but you kind of have to cobble a few things together. I wish that experience were a little bit better. But do you do any, or does your team, I guess, do disaster recovery stuff as well?
We do, but not with the K6 tests.
And I think you said in your talk that you use continuous integration as well. I think you mentioned GitLab CI.
Yeah, right. We use GitLab and the GitLab CI to build our applications and deploy them. And I use GitLab CI to schedule the load tests because this gives me the possibility to have notifications when the thresholds are exceeded. And then I get an email notification, or rather MS Teams notification to a channel with a list of all the thresholds that failed during the last test run, and then we can take action.
Do you use the integration that they've got for K6?
I use a custom pipeline. So just
Okay.
run K6 run and the scripts that we need.
Yeah. Do you use any of the extensions?
Of the K6 extensions, no, not at the moment, but I have some of them on my to-do list.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah.
Which ones were you interested in?
The browser extension that we already talked about. Also, there's a Redis extension to interact with Redis.
I think Mustafa did that, right, Robin?
I think so. I think that's one of Mustafa's, yeah.
At least that's the two extensions that I can think of right now. But the number of extensions is growing and growing, so...
Yeah, it's growing pretty quickly. I was just going to say, I think it's pretty cool that such a sort of safety critical company uses such modern technology. I would have otherwise, thought with prejudice, I guess, that you'd be using sort of old, proven safe technologies. But it's pretty cool to hear that you're using a lot of pretty new things, I would say.
Yeah, I think a lot of the more conventional or traditional or security focused industries tend to use legacy tools, but it looks like Eurofunk is firmly in the 21st century.
Yeah.
You can say that, yeah.
That's good to know. So you said you don't use K6 Cloud. How do you get and analyze the results from K6?
Yeah, so I use the GitLab CI to run the tests, and I then use the summary function in K6 to generate a text summary. I also upload a JSON format of the summary to Elasticsearch so that we can have a record of all the tests that we have executed and the threshold values, or the metric values actually, and the failed thresholds. And during the test, we ship the metrics to an InfluxDB, and then we use Grafana to visualize the test results or the test metrics in dashboards.
Very cool.
Do you use Prometheus at all?
We use Prometheus for application monitoring, yeah. So there are additional dashboards which then plot the application metrics. So then, yeah, we can compare. At this time, a test was running and the CPU spiked, and we can correlate the application behavior with the test behavior.
I promise that my intention was not to bring you on here and be like, did you know of this extension and this one and this one? But just very recently, there was one of our K6 OSS developers, Olha Yevtushenko. She actually just developed an output format for Prometheus remote write. That might be of interest as well.
Yeah, I'll have a look.
So do you just have like a lot of like a full data center or something filled with machines you can just use for load generation?
For load generation, I don't need a full data center, so K6 can already produce enough load with a few hosts.
Are you sure we're not paying him, Robin? That seemed like a very rehearsed response. Are you able to share like a general estimate? Are we talking about thousands of requests per second here, or lower or more?
Unfortunately, I can't disclose this.
That's fair enough. But I know that our CTO, Powell, who has been on Office Hours before, he has done some benchmarks on what K6 is capable of. And he did it in terms of users, virtual users, I believe. But he found that one instance of K6 could generate up to 40,000 users, which I've never done. I think my laptop would give out before then.
It probably would, given that this is one of the very, very beefy AWS EC2 instance types that we used. But it's possible, right? If you have a big enough machine.
Sure, if the machine is big enough and the network is fast enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think before then, my issue would be that it's only being generated from one location. Is location an issue for you at all?
No, our customers have a data center on premise.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Or very closely co-located data centers, actually. So there is redundancy. But we can limit, or we have control over where the requests come from. So it's not cross-country traffic, but it's usually just inside of one or within one country.
Mm-hmm.
So your company handles the calls from 112, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Is that for
Or
all
rather,
of Europe?
our customers handle those calls.
I see. Yeah.
To be precise.
So is it for all European calls, or is it just the ones within Austria or something like that?
Yeah, our customers are mostly Germany and Austria based. Public
So
emergency services.
mainly German speaking.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's still really cool. If I ever have to call 112, I hope I don't. But you know,
You'll never
it's
know.
kind of yeah. I guess I could be there. I'm pretty close to Germany, but it is kind of nice to know that K6 is the one that's ensuring that those systems are performant. Also a little scary.
Don't worry
So-
about it.
is there I'm very interested in knowing, is there anything you've noticed in K6 that you feel is sort of suboptimal, or that would be, could work better, or some functionality that's missing? It's always interesting to hear, because people use it in such different ways, right? Even if it's all testing.
Yeah.
That's always nice to hear, that kind of thing.
This is now going to be a wish list, right?
That's
Go
completely
for
fine.
it.
It's close to Christmas.
Yeah. No, there are a few things. I often miss a debugger when a script does not what I expect it to do. Then I have to go and sprinkle log statements all over it,
Right,
which
yeah.
makes a script slower and the measurements unreliable. And the WebSocket integration was a bit tricky to get working in the beginning, especially the way we use it in our product. So it's not pure WebSocket communication, but it's WebSockets and HTTP requests mixed. And that makes the test scripts a bit inside out.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
Could you expand a bit on that? Because obviously we'd love to hear good feedback. Why did you have to employ a workaround for it? What was the problem with WebSockets?
Yeah, one problem was cookies by default not working, but the workaround was pretty easy to find in a GitHub issue where you could simply set the cookie. But the second thing is that our real browser-based clients, they basically open a WebSocket connection when you open the tab, and it stays open for the lifetime of the application. And then you have the HTTP requests in parallel to the WebSocket connection. And while you're doing the HTTP requests, you get new WebSocket messages in, and then you have to correlate them or maybe react on a WebSocket message. So the browser will then send a different HTTP request depending on whatever information is contained in this message. And that's a bit tricky to set up with the handlers. So the protocol that is used over WebSocket is Stomp with topic subscriptions. Yeah, it's just a bit tricky because you have to open the WebSocket connection, and then there is this inner function with the callbacks, and it works differently than the HTTP calls in K6 because they're synchronous and the WebSocket stuff is asynchronous.
Yeah. It was a little bit of a sort of poor man's event loop, because K6 doesn't have a sort of global event loop, right, to manage asynchronicity. So that's why we did it like that. But hopefully, when we do get a global event loop with asynchronous behavior, we can solve this in a more elegant way, so you can more easily also mix sort of the WebSocket and HTTP and whatever other protocol-based traffic. Yeah, I hear.
Really looking
that.
forward to that.
Sorry?
That sounded like a commitment to me.
Well, I mean, we're already looking into the event loop stuff, right? Mihail has been looking into that. So
yeah, there's a long discussion in GitHub going on about promises and how to implement them.
Yeah.
Can you explain, Robin, what the issue is and why we don't already have it? Like why it's difficult?
So it's difficult because you can't sort of you can't register for asynchronous events, right? So sort of something happening outside of the synchronous execution of your script, right? So you can't subscribe and say, I want to be notified when this event happens, call this JavaScript function. We can't handle that. That wouldn't just work with how we execute JavaScripts today, right? But as Daniel mentioned, like for WebSockets, you need that kind of thing because you can get traffic from the server initiated traffic, right? It's not only the client sending things, so you need asynchronicity. So what we did for WebSocket is that we implemented the WebSocket support in K6 as sort of like a localized event loop, where you register at the beginning when you sort of open up your WebSocket connection. You can set up some handlers for messages being received and pings and things like that. and that works well if you just want to live within sort of the domain of WebSockets. But if you want to mix like HTTP with WebSockets, it's becomes a lot more tricky. So what we're trying to do in K6 is make sure K6 has a global event loop, so you can register for events, whenever it kind of makes sense. So in X-K6 browser, for example, that's also a case where we sometimes want to be able to register for events happening in the browser, so we can react in K6. So yeah, we look forward to having that support basically in K6 to have a better development experience for especially for scenarios that are like a mixed bag of protocols. I don't know if that made any sense, but hopefully a little bit.
I'll be the first one to try it out.
Awesome.
On a side note, Robin, I mean, how many CEOs of tech companies do you know who could actually give a coherent explanation of event loops and why a certain feature is difficult to implement in the way that you did? Like, it is just, it's still, I've been here a year and it's mind-boggling that you can explain things at that level. It's really cool.
Well, thank you.
So yes, it made a lot of sense. more
Okay,
than
cool.
more
Yeah,
than
happy
just
it made
making sense.
to you at least.
And I'm not saying that just because you're my boss. I mean, the pay reviews are done, right? So like, but it does look like Daniel has had to do some workarounds. How do you work around that since you use WebSocket so much?
Well, I open the WebSocket at the beginning of the user function, so the default function, and then I perform the HTTP requests, sometimes directly, sometimes inside of the WebSocket handlers. And then the trick is to find out when to close the WebSocket connection again, otherwise it will block the iteration indefinitely.
Yeah, okay. So not ideal, but I guess okay for now.
It's okay for now, yeah, of course. It's JavaScript, so you can basically do anything that you want. And
yeah.
When you with a little library that I've written, it's not all that bad.
Do you use Threshold? Go on, Robin.
No, sorry, I was going to just mention the other points you mentioned, Daniel. So cookies, I believe we have done some work on better supporting cookies in WebSockets.
I think so, but it didn't work for my use case. But I have to try again.
Okay, yeah.
But the cookie thing, it's a no-brainer. It's just setting the cookie header, and all is good.
Yeah, and I was also going to mention that the debugging support is something that we've had. We mentioned Mustafa before, who has done some of the extensions. He's one of our backend developers. He's also done some work on, I think, a little bit together with Mihail on adding a debugger to Goja, the JavaScript virtual machine that K6 uses. So I think there's a PR in the Goja repo for supporting some debugging of JavaScript run.
Yes.
Yeah,
so that was actually their hackathon project.
Yeah, the last
Mihail
hackathon project,
and Mihail and Mustafa did that. But the problem is it's dependent on the maintainer of Goja as well. So it's I have already asked them that they should, I've told them they should come on office hours and talk about it, but they said there's no point until it's actually, been accepted.
It was a pretty cool sort of proof of concept thing, I think. I thought it was pretty amazing when I saw like a short demo of how it worked. I mean, it's not perfect and production ready, but it's a pretty cool proof of concept of what is actually possible, right? You can clearly see the benefits it would have if it was to be further developed. So I think we should definitely push them to come on office hours. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think they will as soon as it's approved. They worked on it for a week. It's amazing how far they got.
It's amazing for that short amount of time. Yeah,
you can step through every line of the code as well and see what the values are. Like it was pretty good.
Yeah, it was like a GDB, but for JavaScript.
I guess short of that, another option would be to use some sort of proxy, like you could use Fiddler or Charles proxy for Mac to go through to run. You can run K6 and then see the requests and responses that were returned. So I guess that could be a way to debug as well.
For some use cases, yeah.
Yeah, for some, yeah.
Sometimes it's tricky to extract the right data of your responses and then make sure that you put it together in the right way again before sending it. So
yeah,
that would be helpful to have something to look into the script, not just the communication with the server between the script and the backend, but rather
but actually see like
in
the
the
state of the program. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. I guess that's also for the state of the program that you mentioned. That's where the browser level tool could be interesting because it takes screenshots.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just need a screenshot. You
Yeah.
can try to be clever by doing
That's
like text
true.
verifications and stuff, but sometimes it just having a screenshot to look back at a point where there was an error just explains everything.
Totally.
Yeah, or a video sequence, right? That can also be super helpful if you're trying to understand how things actually visually load. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that in conjunction with XK6 browser, Robin, and have you actually seen that in another tool?
The video recording?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so in XK6 browser, we use CDP, right? So Chrome Developer DevTools Protocol. So other tools that support CDP like Puppeteer and Playwright, they also have that support for, I mean, we don't have it yet, but we intend to implement support for basically capturing a recording of what's happening in the browser. And how it works is actually that Chrome streams frames as base 64 encoded
funny.
PNGs. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Oh, okay.
So
It's
you
like
get,
how cartoons are made.
yeah, so exactly.
Interesting.
So as a tool, you get fed all of these like PNGs, right, or JPEGs. I guess you can probably configure it to be as well, and then you have to stitch it together to a video. So I know like Playwright and I think Puppeteer as well. They actually take that stream of PNGs and just feed it to FFmpeg, right? So the CLI tool for working with video files. So
Wow, I didn't know
I
that.
thought
I've never done that in Puppeteer or Playwright.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be some sort of like WebP or some browser native video format or something, but it's actually like screenshots basically taken at a higher frequency. Yeah.
That might be better than like WebM because it's still quite big. Then storage is an issue.
Maybe, yeah. It's but I was just surprised that that's the way they did it, right? And I suppose it's maybe something that was done early rather than something that was done for some optimization reason, right? Because it's I can imagine it would be more efficient to send that kind of data in some other format. But hey, it's pretty cool.
Daniel, what can you tell us about your script? Like, the features that you use? So do you use scenarios? Do you use executors?
Yes, all of them. So I used a scenario. I used the scenarios to set up the request rate. 100 requests per second, for example. And also with the ramps. Start with 100 requests per second and ramp it up to 200, to 400, 800, and so on. And then the thresholds to make sure that the application is responding fast enough and consistently.
So what thresholds do you usually use other than response time?
I have some thresholds defined for counters where I make sure that all the information that goes into the system comes out of the system again. So if there are 5 smoke detectors going off, then I want to see 5 notifications in my system. And I use a counter for that. I also have gauges to keep track of amount of rows or results in lists, so that I can then later correlate them with response time. For example, a longer list might load slower than a shorter list.
So I'm pretty interested in understanding, was it because you use such a wide feature set of K6, which I think is quite impressive, but Was it difficult, you think, to get into, learning K6? And if so, or I guess in any case, did you struggle with anything when you were sort of onboarding to the tool?
I think writing the test function itself is pretty straightforward if you're not using WebSockets mixed with HTTP. But of course, getting the test script right is what takes time and brain power.
Yeah.
Because you need to make sure that you measure the correct things, that you don't measure too much or too little, that you're leaving off certain operations that are actually part of the whole transaction.
Right.
So that's where it's tricky.
Right. So mostly things outside of the tool itself, basically just like making sure that the test logic is performing the right actions and measuring the right things. Yeah. That makes
Writing
sense.
or defining the thresholds can be a bit tricky sometimes, especially in combination with the tags when you have submetrics.
Right. Yeah.
Because you never know if you have a typo in there. You have to run the test and then, where is my metric? All right, I have a typo in there.
Right. Okay.
That's a bit of a downer sometimes.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool if there was some sort of like linting, right? So I guess at the end of a test, you could get some sort of linting saying, "Hey, you didn't receive any samples for this threshold that you set up."
Would be great.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have trouble finding the correct tags. Is it group? Is it name? Is it scenario?
Right. Okay.
So it takes a bit of trial and error until I have the correct submetrics defined. But once I have it, it's really awesome to then simply say, I want this threshold or this endpoint to have a latency of 0.1 seconds. And if that's not the case, then fail the test.
Yeah. Do you have? Interesting to understand, and you can say if this is something you can't share either. But do you get any feedback on the sort of performance of installed systems at your customers? Do you get to see sort of like the observability, I guess, data from that operation?
Yeah, we can watch the production systems with Prometheus and Grafana, so we have application monitoring. Monitoring.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. Do you ever see like any performance problems that you have to sort of take back to the lab, I guess, and sort of work on?
It happens, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But the tricky part is getting the correct data into your pre-prod.
Right. Yeah. That's always tricky, right? Because you can't copy a lot of production.
Yeah, we can't copy it, and there's lots of data, lots of emergency happening.
Yeah.
Around the clock.
So how do you deal with it?
Yeah, that would be interesting to hear. How do you deal with that?
You have to come up with fake data that closely matches the real data. So have a look at the production system and then do some calculations, write a quick script to fill your test environment with data. For example, create 1 million emergencies and then let's have a look if everything still works.
So do you do that like directly on the database, or do you also use K6 to generate the test data?
I use mostly K6 to generate the test data.
Okay.
As like a setup teardown kind of thing, or?
Yeah, as a separate script. So
separate script. Okay.
I have separate scripts which can create vehicles with random names or missions or users or comments, something like that. And by going through the application and make sure that everything is set up correctly. If we were to go directly to the database, you'll never know if the state that you end up with is the correct state.
Right.
So it sounds like your data has states, and how important is it that you have test data in different states? Like, do your scripts move data from one? I don't know. I'm just imagining. I've never done any testing for emergency services, but do you have like a ticket number that has just been received but nothing's happened, and then when it gets responded to, then it goes to like ambulance has been it has been dispatched or something. Are there states like that?
Yeah, kinda. So if there's an emergency, you get a notification in our software, and by accepting the notification, the workflow is started, and you usually end up with a new incident or a mission where you can then dispatch vehicles and responders, execute some additional workflows, calling people or yeah, ringing the alarm bells. I don't know, and then sometimes later the mission is complete, and then you close the incident again, and then it's basically read only.
All right. So I imagine that adds complexity because if you have a script that requires data to be in state 2 and then it puts them to state 3, then are you like also running a script to generate state 2 data at the same time that the test is running?
That's a good question. That was also a really tricky part when designing the tests, because the virtual users in K6, they can't communicate with each other. So there is no synchronization mechanism, which would sometimes be really cool to have kind of queue where you put some ticket IDs, as you said, in them, and then another VU comes and takes a ticket out and then performs additional actions. What we're doing right now is a single VU always performs the full workflow. So from generating the notification through accepting the notification until the incident is closed again, it's always a single virtual user. But it would be cool if I could have two types of users. One type which injects emergencies into the system, if you want, and the other type of users which handles and processes those emergencies.
Once you start getting into states for your data, it gets really complicated because I've done this in the past for mortgage application systems. And the problem is that you have to start, like I had to run a test data flow, like a script, an hour before the real load test started, and it would be running concurrently. But like, what if your load test uses up the data in a certain column before that column is refilled? So we used like a virtual table server for that. I would love to see K6 have something like that just writes to some external thing where you just put data in it and take data off of it. That way the virtual users don't really have to be talking to each other. They can just all be talking to something else.
Yeah, I thought about using the XK6 Redis extension to use Redis as a synchronization mechanism.
This is an interesting topic. I was going to do a shout out to Tom, our professional services guy, who also noticed this right when he started at K6 earlier in the year. So I think he has actually done. I think he has an example repo, I believe, where he shows how you can connect K6 to like a Redis. I think it was Redis-based backend, and basically get the same kind of behavior that we get from load runners virtual table server, I think it's called, right? I've though been pretty, I'll be honest and say that I've been pretty against adding that kind of functionality to K6 itself, right? Because we made this decision very early on in the life of K6 that we wanted a K6 test script to be compatible without modification between the 3 execution modes that we saw ourselves implementing, which is the local execution mode where you run it locally, the cloud case where you run it like in our cloud across many servers, potentially geographically distributed, and also the local clustered case where you run it locally but clustered over several machines or pods or something. And it's very difficult to have any sort of guarantee when you have like a central
global state.
Once you have the sort of the global scale of things, it's very difficult to guarantee anything when you have like a central authority that needs to be sort of requested for these kinds of things. That's why we've basically resisted adding this kind of functionality to K6, just because of that sort of wanting to support these different execution modes without having people need to modify their script for like, oh, I need to add this now to be able to run it clustered or yada yada. So it's there's a reason why we haven't added it though. But it comes up frequently. That's what I'm trying to say. Like a lot of people realize that this would be very useful. So the way to solve it basically would be, for example, using the Redis extension and doing it if you're running tests in such a way where it actually works, right? Given that there's some latency. Yeah. Interesting topic.
There's another approach. Test Data Services is a paid service, I believe, and it's created by a performance engineer, and he does it for Australia. And the idea is, instead of using something like Faker to generate random data on the fly, you use the service that has a bunch of identities. So I don't know if it would really work with this situation, but for people that need like a name that's tied to an email address and a tax file number, like it's a whole list of fake people that you could use. And the benefit of that is you can check that the data is correct, because when you're just generating with Faker, there's no verification. You're just checking that you've put a name, but you don't know if that name was listed against the right email address. And then they also do these multi-factor authentication, so you can send an email and then there's an API endpoint for just getting the code from the email and then putting it in your script. So that's I guess that's another interesting approach as well.
Neat. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't get an affiliate link or anything.
Just waiting
No
for that to come in the
commissions.
comments.
And check out the link in the description below to get 20%. No, nothing like that. But on that note, we're already over time. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's so
thanks for having
cool
me.
to be able to talk to you about your experience. It's just really awesome. And thank you as well, Robin, for coming and helping
Anytime.
me.
Anytime. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so this is going to be the last office hours this year. And this is the 37th episode. So I think that's not bad in a year. I've really enjoyed doing these, and I hope to do more next year. But I guess in the meantime, to you both and to anybody who's watching, happy holidays and hug your family.
Yeah. Happy holidays, everyone. Thanks so much.
Happy
All right,
holidays.
bye everyone.
Bye.